All right, we'll call this Committee of the Whole, Council Committee Meeting of the Whole, meeting of June 25th, 2024 open. Thank you for attending today, and I think we have Mayor Clark online. I'll just confirm that's the case and maybe do a quick sound check to make sure we can hear you, Mayor Clark. Or you can hear us. Can you see her on that? Oh, is Councillor Canola online? I can't see either of them, sorry, so.
Hello, I'm here.
Councillor Canola's there. Mayor Clark, can you just confirm that you can hear us and we'll just make sure we can hear you?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we have a presentation today of about budget deliberations and new growth opportunities. So City Manager Mitchell, please lead us in. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and I'm really happy to be here today. I won't belabor the meeting. We've done a lot of work behind the scenes. I really want to thank Dennis and Aaron and Lola and their teams because they have been back and forth to executive to SLT to work on the budget together with everybody, Sarosh as well with our ranking system. And we've taken council's consideration, your vision, and put it together, and really, this is a very thoughtful budget. So I will turn it over to Managing Director Egert now. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager Mitchell. Welcome, Managing Director Egert.
Good afternoon. Chairperson Robbins and members of the Council Committee, welcome. Welcome to part one of two of our 2025-2026 budget deliberation series that we're calling New Growth Opportunities. So you may ask, what are new growth opportunities? This two-meeting series focus on opportunities to invest in our city in new services, programs, operational initiatives, capital projects, all part of the upcoming 25-26 budget cycle. Administration is recommending to you 55 opportunities that we believe will advance Council's plan to build a vibrant and sustainable community, not only for today, but for the future. Today's deliberation will focus on the strategic. To begin, I want to read a quote of inspiration to you from you, Council. This quote comes from the Council Strategic Plan. A message from Council: we all want to live in a vibrant, prosperous, and sustainable community where we feel a sense of belonging. Our community is facing a crucial turning point as our economic, environmental, and social landscape shifts around us. This council was elected to ensure that our city is resilient and positioned to thrive in the future. So members of council, this deliberation of new growth opportunities is a chance to do just that, to position the city to thrive into the future. The decisions made as a result of the next two deliberation sessions will have a significant impact on how the city grows and is shaped over the upcoming years. So we've responded to council's feedback from previous budgets, namely the 2023 and 2024 budget process, and you had asked for three things: a more direct tie between budget and your strategic plan, more justification for budget requests, and more time to deliberate. And this session, we will accomplish all three of those requests. Each new growth opportunity has been justified through a business case, which is the compendium document as part of your meeting package. The explanation provides both a connection to council's strategic priorities and a financial impact if we were to move forward with this initiative. We hope to make this connection to strategic priorities even more clear as we present today. So in addition, the discussions over these next two meetings will provide the opportunity for up to 6 hours of dedicated discussion and debate. Far more time than we provided in previous budget cycles. We are excited to share this time with you today and on July the 9th as we work together to position the city for success in the upcoming budget cycle. As I mentioned before, these discussions are intended to be strategically focused, future-orientated, and community-minded. While there will be plenty of time to discuss the current operational activities in the final deliberation sessions, expect over the next few months we'll also engage you on discussions surrounding energy transition and facilities for the future. Today, however, we want to be thinking more visionary. So at this point, I'd like to thank and acknowledge the work of so many in this organization who prepared these new growth opportunity business case recommendations. Special recognition to Aaron Heimer and his team, as well as various support departments, including communications, corporate planning, and energy. So now I'll invite Aaron Heimer, Accounting Supervisor for Budget and Systems, to the podium to begin this presentation. Aaron.
Thank you, Managing Director Eggert. Okay. Hello, and thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to be here today to discuss what we're calling new growth opportunities. I'm very excited for this session. I think it's going to be an opportunity for us to focus on the future, focus on ways that we can make the city a better place for tomorrow. With the introductory remarks out of the way, let's take a look at what we're going to discuss today. First, we'll go through a little bit of an overview of the session and show you what you should be expecting over the next couple of sessions that work together. Then we're going to look at a quick recap on what we discussed in our previous budget deliberations, which was on April 23rd, the budget planning deliberations. Then we'll get into a little budgeting 101, where I want to talk a little bit about financial sustainability and how that ties into the new growth opportunities that we're going to be looking at. Then we'll talk about the project selection process, which is the process that we undertook to bring the list to you that you are seeing today. We'll take a little break at this time if we can, and then we'll come back to our new growth opportunities after the break, and then jump into council questions. As I started in the previous meeting, I just want to remind everyone today that this is your deliberation session. So we are facilitating, but feel free at any time to stop us, ask questions. And if there are any questions that we're not able to answer today adequately, we will take this away and we will come back on July 9th, and that'll be the first thing that we take a look at when we get back together. So let's jump right into our series overview. Today's objectives are primarily to understand the process that we undertook to get the list that you have before you today, and how these opportunities fit into your overall strategic plan. We want to introduce you to our recommendations and then communicate our next steps. Today's meeting is the first meeting of a two-meeting series of Council Deliberation Committee of the Whole. The second meeting will take place on July 9th. And if the first meeting is more of us presenting to you, July 9th is really Council's opportunity to respond and ask questions about the projects that we will be presenting today, as well as a time to deliberate amongst yourselves on the recommendations that we provided. After which, on July 15th, which is a regular council meeting, we will give the opportunity at that meeting for council to put forward any official motions to add or remove items from the list or modify items that you see on the list. So that's kind of the overview of the three sessions that we'll be taking you through today. In your package that you've received, there is a compendium document with every business case that we are recommending, including the ones that we didn't recommend. Those ones are also included in there, along with the justifications for the projects themselves that we reviewed internally and decided to defer to future years. Those are open for your consideration as well. If you haven't taken a look at the package in detail, that's okay. The intention was for us to be able to sort of frame that discussion, and then between now and the next meeting, that's really the opportunity to take a deep dive into that compendium document and come up with all of the questions that you possibly have about the new opportunities. And then on July 9th, it's your opportunity to ask absolutely anything and everything that you would like to know about those projects. Just to look at our budget pathway then. Today's session marks the second session in our budget pathway. The first session was the budget planning session that happened on April 23rd, and that's where we laid the high-level philosophical framework for how we would go about building the budget and presented you with our key assumptions and funding targets. The New Growth Opportunities session builds on the foundation that we started in the budget planning session. These discussions will lay the groundwork for the city to compile its budget that we will come back in November with, including our budget proposals and final deliberation discussions that we'll be having in October and November with you. As mentioned in the previous session, we must pass a budget before December 31st in order to remain on side with our Municipal Budget Government Act. However, our definition of a successful budget this year is one that inspires the confidence of council that and that's what we want to be able to do through this budget session with you today. The key question posed to council today and on July 9th will be, does the recommended new growth opportunities enact your strategic vision? Looking then at our budget structure, where does the session that we're going to be discussing today and on July 9th, where does this fit into our budget structure? This primarily fits into our budget structure in the second tier, which is on the operating budget side, new initiatives, and on the capital side, growth capital opportunities. This is the focus of these June and July deliberations, and we will be coming back to look at the base and the sustaining once again in November, October, November. However, we did lay the groundwork for the base and the sustaining in that Tier 1 during our April 23rd deliberations. Okay, so just taking a quick recap then of that Tier 1. Our operating budgets for 25-26 were set to match the 2024 budgets that were approved by council, except for some salary and revenue accounts and some unavoidable costs. We then set a path to balance with three key measures. First was service efficiency targets. The second was transfers from in-year business unit earnings, as well as heritage savings. And the third was tax revenue increases. On the capital side, we have considered a combination of historical and future forecasted needs to set an appropriate baseline for the sustaining capital, with future years being adjusted annually for inflation. There's two things that councillors may be considering regarding Tier 1. The first is, what options do we have to pay for these new opportunities? Can we cut current services to make room for new opportunities? Well, administration has already anticipated this and has proactively added cuts to the base budget in three major ways. As we mentioned before, setting the 2024 budget, setting the 25-26 budgets at the 2024 levels essentially holds those budgets to the 24 levels, asking departments to absorb any inflationary pressures that they may experience over the next 2 years, which is in essence a budget reduction. We've also built in a $2 million service level efficiency target to our budget. And the second thing is on the capital side, you'll remember from the April 23rd session that we showed a slide that had a number of examples of inflationary increases on it. In some cases, we are experiencing inflation well over 100% since 2019 to things like steel pipes, cement, fire trucks, buses, all kinds of things that we purchase and use on a daily basis within the city. Our budget for 2025-26 started at a baseline of only 17% higher than our 23-24 budget, which we consider to barely be covering the cost of inflation. And therefore, we have asked departments to defer where they can in order to help with some of these costs of inflation. So already built into our budget, we have a number of measures to help keep costs low. The second thing that councillors might be wondering is, how can we discuss growth before we discuss the base? Well, we have effectively discussed the base operations already on April 23rd when we set the key assumptions and modeled out the tax impacts of those assumptions. If we're able to stick to our targets, then the amounts that we estimated on April 23rd will indicate our intended rates for property tax, as well as our impacts on cash, debt, earnings, and the budget gap over a 10-year horizon. This should give some level of comfort that we've done some due diligence to set some parameters for the base budget, making room for today's discussion. Jumping into a bit of a budget recap then, let's talk about where we landed with the April 23rd. So just wanted to start off by reminding Council of the budget theme, balancing the needs of today with the requirements of tomorrow. I've also got this up here on the side as a constant reminder throughout the presentation of our budget theme. Our legacy as administrators, city leaders, and councillors is not just what we do with our term or our time of employment, but how we set the city up for success into the future. We know that we are facing challenges on the horizon regarding energy transition, stagnant population growth, inflation, and so much more. We need to be answering the questions in this budget cycle: what are we doing to set the city up for success in the future? The statement that Managing Director Eggert read to you from the Council's strategic plan shows that this Council has a similar commitment to the future prosperity of this city. So in today's discussion, we will provide an opportunity for Council and for administration to help position the city to thrive into the future. Some of the budget commitments then that we laid out for you in the previous session include addressing the community needs and ensuring excellent service, balancing affordability with the need to invest in city infrastructure and operations, ensuring financial sustainability of our municipality, thoughtful use of financial reserves for future needs, and alignment with Council's strategic priorities. We've highlighted 3 of these on the screen for you today because we believe that these have the greatest tie to the new growth opportunities that we're going to be discussing today. Addressing community needs and ensuring excellent service. In our discussions today, our growth opportunities are the opportunity for the city to realign its resources to address community needs more directly. Balancing affordability with the need to invest in infrastructure and operations. As we discuss these goals, we will keep in mind the constraint of affordability, doing our best to signal the cost and the tangible impact to the taxpayer or the ratepayer for every investment that we are proposing to the city to invest in city infrastructure and operations. And finally, alignment with Council's strategic priorities. Each one of our new growth opportunities has been identified with at least one strategic priority, although many of them actually hit on multiple strategic priorities.
I have a question. Can I ask it at this time? Councillor Robbins?
Sure, go ahead, Mayor Clark.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, and this relates to something you said about 5 minutes ago or 3 minutes ago. So you mentioned that the budget was being cut and departments were being asked to absorb inflationary costs. Obviously, there are consequences to anything like that, and I think it's difficult to make decisions about that without knowing what those consequences will be. And then secondly, we have never really, this is where I thought you were going with baseline. We haven't ever had a discussion about what our current, like a list of what our current programs and service levels are. And so, I mean, I think that is step 1 before we start expanding on them. So those are 2 things that I think I would like further information on.
Great. Thank you for the question, Mayor Clark. To respond to your first concern about the cuts without knowing the full impact, essentially what we've done in our budget is we've asked where departments are able to make cuts without having a drastic impact to service levels or performance to make those cuts, we have provided an opportunity, as we mentioned, for those unavoidable increases. And the intention with the cuts that we've proposed to departments is to look at those discretionary budgets, to look at those places where there are costs that could be cut without major impact to the community. And to cut there where they can. If there are areas where that cannot happen, we have provided a way through our budget process that we're calling our cost pressures as an opportunity for the departments to flag that they are not able to maintain within the inflationary budget. And so in this way, we're trying to find that good balance of cutting where we can, but not holding people back in places where it's going to have a detrimental effect. So that would be with regard to the key assumptions that we provided on April 23rd. There was an assumption in there for what I referred to as unavoidable costs. There was an $11 million target in there. So we have provided some allotment for that piece as well. And regard to the second question with regard to service levels, within our budget, we do have an intention. It's one of the intentions of our corporate strategic objectives to put together a service level inventory for council for consideration. So this is tied to that second bullet on the previous slide, if this will go back for me. My clicker doesn't seem to be working, sorry. I'll go back here. That $2 million service/efficiency target. So it's the intention of before these cuts are enacted, it's the intention of the administration to come back to council with that service inventory list and some recommendations to council of places where we could potentially make those cuts so that you're fully aware of any kind of adjustments that we're making to service levels and how those things would impact the community before we go ahead and make those budget cuts.
Councillor Van Dyke has a question as well, Mr. Heimer.
Thank you, through the chair. I thought I would ask it now while you were still, oh, you've left that slide now. It's fine. The $8 million, you have it coming from two places. I just wondered how much of that was coming from the heritage savings versus the in-year business unit earnings.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, the breakdown isn't on the screen. It was provided in April 23rd. The breakdown is $5 million of heritage savings and then $3 million from in-year business unit earnings. This is in line, at least the $3 million is in line with what we have transferred from our in-year business unit earnings in previous cycles. So we're suggesting the continuance of that into the next budget cycle. And then that $5 million is a new investment from heritage savings, something that we haven't tapped into in the past.
May I follow up on that?
Go ahead, Mayor Clark.
Thank you, through the chair. Is the $5 million that you're talking about from Heritage Reserve part of the dividend or the subsidy to municipal operations from the Heritage Reserve that was predicted to occur in 2026 in last year's budget meetings?
That's correct. We did have intentions in the previous year budget meetings to tap into the Heritage Savings Reserve. A little bit of a nuance this year is that a portion of that we are saying could be utilized for taxpayer relief. However, we're not indicating that the full $5 million should be used merely for taxpayer relief. We do think that those funds should be targeted for specific initiatives, specifically within economic development and livability within your council's strategic plan.
Councillor Hirsch.
Sorry.
Thanks for that. And so I guess on even more into the weeds on that 5 million from Heritage, is that amount, because I'll go back to the reestablishment of the Heritage Fund was meant to be a legacy, obviously, as we move on from our oil and gas division. So the question I have is that, does that reduce the capital to the Heritage Fund, or is that via the proceeds from investments of? So is the core capital reducing, or is that basically the interest or whatever that it would appreciate through that investment?
The Heritage Savings Reserve is actually protected by law. We can't erode the capital base on that. In fact, it's protected from the time value of money as well. So we are only able to access a component of the investment earnings that exceed our CPI or inflationary rate for Alberta. So this is an assumption of, right now we have about 200 million in that Heritage Savings Reserve. This is from that surplus that we're anticipating up and beyond an inflationary amount. So the capital base would remain intact and would grow actually with inflation.
Well, I think it's just important for us to, or I guess the public to understand that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hirsch. I'm just going to ask those online, if you have a question, if you can raise your hand. I now can see that your hands are being raised, and if everyone here can use their button, that does help, and I'll keep track. Instead of constantly scanning, I'm trying to listen to Mr. Heimer, but I will definitely get to those questions. So if you just use the button, that would be helpful. Okay, go ahead, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so these budget goals that you're seeing up on the screen, this wasn't provided in a slide necessarily in the previous, in the previous deliberations. However, these were some of the things that we talked about, things that we're looking to do as budget goals this year in order to enact those commitments that we talked about in the previous slide. So some of those were realigning financial resources to where they can better serve the community, ensuring property tax increases are sustainable and predictable, using programs like Fair Entry to provide relief to the most vulnerable, identifying major opportunities and challenges ahead for the city and earmarking financial reserves, balance the municipal budget gap by 2026, reduce reliance on business unit revenue and lessen the risk of declining commodity-based revenues into the future, maintain sufficient financial reserves, and align with Council's strategic priorities. I just want to provide a flag here that later in this package we will be talking about the Fair Entry rebate credit that was administered through utility bills over the past few years. This item did fall below our line of funding for this year, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail later on. However, just want to alleviate some confusion on that before we get started. The Fair Entry program is much broader than the rebate credit program that was administered through the utility bills in the previous years. It also encompasses subsidies for access to city recreational facilities, transit passes, and some educational programs. Our recommendation does call for those subsidies to continue. Just looking back then at council's responses. So in the previous council, we did do a poll to council to just get a bit of a pulse check on where council's thoughts were at the time surrounding specific issues. These weren't meant to be votes or to hold you to a specific place. I just wanted to bring them up to remind what we did ask. This was not to make decisions. The answers were actually quite helpful, both in the clarifications to the questions as well as the answers that were provided. Council was mostly in agreement with finding ways to reduce exposure to volatile business earnings. You were open to exploring options to reduce service levels in order to eliminate the budget gap and make room for new operating initiatives, and supported the use of heritage savings reserves in 2025 and 2026 with no strings attached for future budget cycles. However, council in general was less supportive of tax increases higher than inflation to balance the budget by 2026. It was a concern from council about the affordability of tax increases for residents. However, council also appreciated the operational challenges that administration was facing and seemed to be open to looking into this further. As we go into today's discussion, we hope to continue this conversation as we look at the benefits of new growth opportunities as well as the potential costs associated. Okay, just a couple of key assumption changes that we've made since the April 23rd council. So we've been working hard behind the scenes to start to compile some more detailed information about these key assumptions, testing them against the actual operations of our departments and what they're putting forward as their needs. And we've made a couple of changes here. The first one is with sustaining capital. We did have a key assumption of 178.5 million. We have increased that to 195.6. That's an increase of $17.1 million. And this jump in sustaining capital is primarily due to a response to having a clearer line of sight on what the costs and timing of those capital projects for the 25-26 budget cycle look like. This represents an increase of 28% since the 23-24 budget, which we still feel is within the range of what would be considered an inflationary increase. We have reduced our growth capital, which is what one of the items that we'll be discussing today. It was at 37.4 as a preliminary target. Now that we've compiled the numbers and provided them for you today, we've reduced that amount by 1 million, and some of that is obviously to try to help with the increases on the sustaining capital side. This still represents a 5.5% increase from the original budget in 23-24. We've moved from a $5 million operating initiatives target to a recommendation, which we'll be providing you today, of $10.3 million in new operating initiatives. Over the 25-26 budget, this covers about 61% of all the requests that came forward. After review of the new growth opportunities for operating, there were many needed and worthy projects that our team could not reasonably defer. Therefore, we have recommended to move forward with a larger list of projects than initially anticipated. This has resulted in an overall shift to our property tax of assumptions from 4.9 with a 5.05% assessment growth estimate to 5.1% with a 0.5 assessment growth estimate in 25 and 26. This increase also includes an increase to our 25-26 budget gap of $3.4 million. Okay, jumping into budgeting financial sustainability. So the first principle of financial sustainability as we're looking at these new growth opportunities that we want to highlight is the need to prioritize current operations. Just like your household, you must ensure that you are covering your monthly bills before considering adding new expenses. If you have a monthly deficit that's eating a hole in your savings, it may not be prudent to consider investing in new activities. If your household costs increase because everything is going up in price, covering the cost of these increases comes before buying the new vehicle or going on vacation. You must prioritize the essentials. For us, that is our day-to-day operations, so that as a city we can continue to do the things that residents have become accustomed to. After we've considered our monthly bills, we have excess room. If we have some excess room, we can consider new growth opportunities. So today's discussion will focus primarily on the new growth opportunities. As we talked about in Tier 1, we've covered the base and the sustaining capital piece. So now what we're talking about is that excess amount that the city is recommending that we have to invest in new growth opportunities. Okay, the second principle that we want to highlight is the principle of a sustainable investment. We want to make sure that the amount of the new growth opportunities that we invest is sustainable into the future. There's two aspects of this that I want to highlight. The first is that we want to make sure that with all of the new things that we're doing, that we're considering the ongoing operating costs. If you have a new facility that you're bringing online, there's staff, there's operational costs to maintain, to continue to provide the services of that facility, to repair that facility, and eventually to replace that facility. We need to factor these things into the long-term picture. And this is one of those things that often gets lost in translation when we focus just on a 2-year cycle. What we're trying to do is focus more on a 10-year cycle and show how these things impact over the long run so that we do not lose sight of those ongoing operating costs tied to new growth opportunities. The second thing is we want to make sure that we are setting a precedent that we are able to repeat in future cycles. So for example, we would not want to spend $100 million today and completely dry up the city's coffers, leaving no funding for future councils or future cycles. Whatever level of investment that we are making today should be repeatable into the future. So what does this look like for our current budget recommendations? We've factored into our pro forma model, which you're seeing a snippet of it on the screen here, with the cash being, or consolidated cash as an organization along the bottom. Based on our projections, we do see that the city's cash position is likely to drop about $30 million each year leading up to 2030, when revenues in our energy department are lower, and then recover leading up to 2035. So what's the story here? As we mentioned in the last period, our city has exposure to lowering electric generation revenues over the next number of years as electric generation returns to more historic levels. The cash burn, the $30 million per year, reverses temporarily in 2030 as we approach the 2035 net zero carbon targets. The cash burn we are seeing poses a risk poses a risk to the organization if those earnings after 2030 do not materialize. Typically, the longer term a forecast is, the more uncertainty it provides. This is even more true when we're talking about electric generation, given all of the major uncertainties surrounding the future of the business, as well as the natural volatility of the pricing market. If these earnings do not materialize in 2030, we will want to have enough cash on hand to pivot. We will likely need to escalate our plans to reduce reliance on earnings and would not want to burden the taxpayer with unexpected drastic increases. I mention this because the increased revenue leading up to 2035 may seem like a good news opportunity for the city, but this isn't the case at all. The draft 2035 federal carbon targets presents a significant potential requirement for the city to decarbonize its electric generation capacity before the current fleet reaches its natural end of life. How do we continue operating a business in a net zero carbon environment? At this point in time, the city has three major options before it. The first is to decarbonize its existing assets, to capture the carbon using carbon capture technologies. The second is to diversify by adding clean sources of energy, investing in renewable energy. And the third is to decrease our self-reliance, importing electricity to the grid, for example, instead of making it ourselves. It's likely that a combination of these three measures is a likely outcome, but regardless of the route that we take as a city, we will be investing hundreds of millions of dollars, and otherwise we will risk the loss of revenue sources that the city currently relies on. And those hundreds of millions of dollars have not yet been factored into the illustration that we saw on the other screen. We must also be mindful that our city is currently conducting an energy business model review, and the province is looking at a provincial electricity market design, both of which could have a significant impact on the support that the electric business can provide for the city moving forward. There are many unknowns with our electric generation business. So as we discuss new growth opportunities today, we just need to be mindful that we still have big rocks like energy transition and facilities for the future to discuss later this year. For that reason, we are recommending that Council please consider, if you are adding items to the list, to also consider items to recommend to take off of the list so that we maintain the funding levels that have been recommended that we're presenting to you today. You may be wondering whether it's wise to invest in new growth opportunities with such large considerations still to come. However, while these two items are important for us to consider, we need to be aware that our city is very diverse and it has many needs. And those needs don't slow down because of energy transition or facilities for the future. We have attempted to provide a sustainable picture that includes a sustainable investment in new growth opportunities, which we believe establishes a realistic baseline to have those discussions about energy transition and facilities for the future. That being said, we are working through financials related to those key areas and hope to bring further insights and implications to Council before the final budget decisions are made. With a reminder that today, as we work through these new growth opportunities, that this is still preliminary. As we move towards a final decision later in the year, we're on step 2 of our budget pathway. We still have a ways to go. So while we make decisions here in the next 2 weeks, none of these things are finalized until the end of the year. We'll have an opportunity to revisit them as we go through the next stages. But we do believe that setting this baseline is an important baseline prior to having those discussions about facilities for the future and energy transition. So what does a sustainable baseline look like? Well, this is from our previous budget deliberation package, but what we have done is we have established fiscal targets. And these are targets that with every decision that we make, every dollar that we want to add to the operating baseline, every investment in energy transition, we can model out what is the impact on these fiscal targets, and it's our way of creating a gauge of whether the things that we are doing are financially sustainable. For example, we've targeted a $581 million cash position as a low position, sorry, $576 million as a low position. Our current cash position is at 581 at its lowest point in 2030. This includes Heritage Savings Reserve, and it may seem like a lot of money, but when you consider the hundreds of millions that we just discussed tied to energy transition and facilities for this future, you can appreciate why the city is in the place that it is. We are a unique municipality. Other municipalities do not have the same types of obligations that we have, and so we have to keep that in mind. This is about enough funding to pay for our day-to-day operations, the cash position that I mentioned, to fund our Heritage Savings Reserve and to provide operating contingency of about 10% for our municipal expenses and about 5 years' worth of capital. We don't believe that this is an excessive amount for the city of Medicine Hat, just due to the uniqueness and the risk within our electric generation market. We need some room to pivot in the future as these uncertainties unfold. What you're seeing here up on the screen is a visual representation of the pro forma model that we've built for the city. This allows us to take a look at the decisions that we're making today and layer on things like energy transition facilities for the future to sort of see what the impacts to our decisions today will make over a 10-year fiscal horizon. What we've provided to you today with the new growth opportunities included does remain within our initial fiscal targets that we have set for the city, clearing our budget gap by 2026 with a 5.6% increase per year in 25 and 26, maintaining that low target of $576 million in cash, which I indicated before is tied to our operational and capital reserve targets. Free cash flow, which is the profit that, or the earnings rather, that we receive from our business units, our utilities, our energy, our land. We have a target of, I believe, 38.1. You can see that we are meeting that target on average over the long-term horizon, but there is some risk to this one if the earnings in the energy department do not materialize by 2030. And finally, our debt to revenue ratio. This one is set by the Municipal Government Act. So we have a city policy to maintain 70% of that Municipal Government Act. And our current high point over the 10-year period actually happens in 2025, first year in the 10-year cycle, and that is 58%. So what does this show us? On top of all of the stuff that we just mentioned, we do have some risks and uncertainties. We've mentioned many of them already for you here today. Some of the other ones that I didn't mention before, ad hoc requests for funding, including funding from external parties, something that we're not able to map out. We're not sure what could come forward as requests, but those things always present risk that our targets could slip, as well as the natural risks of market volatility and further reductions to provincial funding, which we mapped out in the budget planning session on April 23rd. So again, this is just to highlight we've maintained those fiscal targets with what we've provided to you today over the 10-year horizon. We believe that we can maintain those targets. However, as we look forward, if we continue to add on to, we could slip very easily out of those fiscal targets. And again, we're just recommending to council that if you do seek to add things to the list that maybe we missed that are deemed important, that we also consider taking things off the list to keep that funding target established. Okay, and then looking at financial sustainability, the other thing that we should be aware of is what is the cost of a new investment? So we did a bit of a sensitivity analysis here to show you what the impact of adding $1 million to our operational funding envelope would do to our rates and to our property taxes. On the municipal side, a $1 million incremental increase to operating expense results in a 1.11% tax increase. A $1 million increase to our operating on the rate-based utility side would result in a 3.86% increase to water, or 4.45% increase to sewer, 8.22 in solid waste, 5 million in distribution and gas electric distribution, and 6 million in gas distribution. And that's $1 million if it were to be invested in any one of those rate-based utilities. Depending on the nature of the costs and how they're allocated, the timing, this could impact residential different than commercial. So this is an average rate. So that's just a note as well. Flipping over then to the capital side, what would be the cost if we were to invest $5 million into a capital project, not taking into consideration, of course, that ongoing operating component, but merely just the cost of the capital investment itself? How would that impact the city's finances? Well, adding $5 million of capital to any one of the business units would result in approximately $5 million of cash leaving the bank by our low point in 2030. That's the initial cash draw out of the reserve, as well as any repayments on debt would amount to about $5 million. This would also increase our budget gap by about $300,000, mostly due to the lost investment as well as the need to repay interest on debt. And then, of course, our debt to revenue ratios would move up by about 0.3%. And just as a reminder, our target right now, we're looking at 58%. We're at about 58%. We're trying to stay under 70%. We still have facilities for the future. We still have energy transition to look at. So this is just a picture of what adding additional capital might cost to the city, as well as there could be rate impacts. So if that $5 million was invested into one of our rate areas, there could be a rate impact as well. So if $5 million was invested into water, this could result in about a 1% increase to our overall water rates, 1% to sewer, 2% in solid waste, 1.5 in gas distribution, about 1.25 in electric distribution. And again, the timing of when that overall rate impact happens may happen over time as that capital comes online. It may not all happen within the budget cycle. It all depends on when that capital is in place and ready to use. Looking at our project prioritization then, maybe I should pause there because I've been talking for a while and see if there's any questions before I continue. Okay.
Councillor Madej, go ahead.
Sorry, and thank you through the chair. I'm having a problem with buttons tonight. I had a question going back a couple slides to the financial sustainability, considering long-term impacts. So on that slide, and you've mentioned this repeatedly, it's in our package, we've talked about this before, energy transition and facilities for the future is not included in any of this.
That's right.
So it's not in any of these graphs either. So my concern is the debt to revenue ratio if we start adding in facilities to the future, particularly because that we look at long-term borrowing for things like that serve the community for a long time. Has any modeling been done in that area to figure out if we are going into the danger zone? Thank you.
That's an excellent question. We're currently working through those funding models right now, so we don't have a full picture yet to show. The issue is it's not just about when we're going to spend the capital, it's how is it going to be funded. Some of it could be through debt. We could utilize our own reserves. There may be opportunities for provincial grant funding. There could be other opportunities as well. So we're trying to model out what would be a sustainable picture, and that takes some time. There's a lot of different moving pieces to consider. So we will be working on that and bringing it back. It may result in us taking a look at our fiscal targets again. We may have to think about, is it reasonable for us to move that target? So those are some of the decisions that may come out of those recommendations. But for now, what we're signaling is our status quo position. We feel like we're maintaining at a pretty decent level with the recommendations that we're providing. It provides that proper baseline for those discussions to happen.
I don't see any further questions in the room or online, so go ahead.
Okay. It's your loss if I continue to talk all night, so. All right, let's jump into project prioritization then. Does anyone know where this is in the city? Yes, okay, I see some nodding heads. This is Kincooley. This is Kipling Street. It runs right near the skate park downtown, down in Kincooley, rather. Kincooley is one of the city's most beautiful parks in our city. However, did you know that under the ground runs probably one of the most vital supplies of water for our city? Underneath Kipling Street runs a piece of infrastructure, a water supply that supplies 32% of city's water customers. To protect that key supply of our city administration has put together a proposal to twin that line that runs under the Kipling Street. This will help to provide contingency and allow crews to shut down the line so that there can be more regular inspections to lower the risks of things like what happened in Calgary earlier this month. The city of Medicine Hat is complex, and our operations touch on everything from roads to waterways to electricity to gas distribution to parks to protective services. Each service has its needs for infrastructure renewal, for improvements, for risk mitigation, and for strategic growth. It would be nearly impossible to expect council or a member of the public to be a subject matter expert on all of the arenas and to understand all the intricacies of what make them work. I certainly am not an expert in all of these areas. It'd be very easy for someone to overlook a project merely because of a lack of awareness. This is why we begin the budget deliberation process by administration recommending projects to council as opposed to the other way around. Council should be able to rely on administration that we are going to be proposing those projects that are strategically and operationally relevant for your consideration. So we all know that how we spend finances comes with great responsibility. And we know that we must do our best to ensure that every dollar that the city reinvests into the city is done purposefully and strategically. In order to do this, we must ensure that the discussion that we facilitate is intentional, to ensure that all of the vital interests and perspectives are being considered. From the operational to the strategic to the governance and even the public, all perspectives help the city to make well-informed decisions about where to invest the city's finances. As we demonstrated in the previous slide, the city's administration plays a key role in ensuring that the right projects are in front of executive leadership and council so that they can make good decisions. With this framework in mind, executive leadership looks at the overarching goals for the organization and prioritizes those things that they believe will help accomplish the corporate strategic objectives for the city, as well as meet the operational needs and set the city up for future growth. This recommendation is then passed on to council, who makes the final call, and who is able to respond with a well-informed understanding of the community's needs to ensure that the city is prioritizing those things that are important for the community. So today, as we begin this discussion, that's where we are at. What you see before you is a list of what administration believes is operationally and strategically relevant for the city. And now we are looking to you to give your endorsement and to add to that a community-focused lens. Our prioritization process begins with our departments. Departments and managers will develop business cases, and those cases are prioritized internally by the departments to understand which new opportunities are the most important for those departments. That information is then reviewed by managing directors for the area to give a go, no-go to include the business cases in our ranking process. These cases then have been vetted by our departments and division leads to ensure that they are in alignment with the strategic visions for the operational departments and divisions. Our corporate planning and performance, or CPP as it's called, and our ranking committees will then apply a scoring system to look at each project from the perspective of the city's priorities. Opportunities that score highest are put to the top of the list, and opportunities that score lower fall to the bottom of the list. And then we apply a funding target to set a cutoff for new projects. Items that fall below the funding line are not recommended. Items that are above the line are recommended for funding. This list is provided to our executive leadership team, and it's their job then, and this is where the science part ends and where the art part begins. At this point, we have applied an administrative lens. We have a list of projects that city operations deems are important, and that list has been prioritized by an objective scoring system. Executive leaders then apply a strategic lens, looking at where the list perhaps provides too much or too little of specific priorities. Executive leaders will tweak the list to ensure that it balances our priorities strategically. Ultimately, going through a ranking process, there's no ranking process that is going to provide you a complete and perfect utilization where everybody agrees that this is what the city needs. And so this is where we apply that art component to look at the overall recommendation and say, are we missing something? And that's what executive leaders engage in. This list is then provided to you, council, for final consideration. The list has been vetted by operations, by strategic leadership, it's been ranked, and now the final layer is looking at this from that big picture governance community perspective. And that's where we are at today. You are here, as it says on the screen. So this is all just to highlight the rigorous process that our city engages in order to bring forward to you these recommendations that you are seeing here today. Our departments, our directors, our managers have collectively spent the time to put together over 82 different recommendations. And these recommendations include about $49 million worth of growth capital opportunities and $16.9 million of new operating initiatives. Of those 82, we have recommended 55 and have deferred 27. With that, this is my close on the on this part of the deliberation session. So I'll open it up to questions, and if not, I'll pass it back to Councillor Robbins.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Heimer. Any questions at this point of what we've heard? I don't see any online, and I don't see, oh, sorry, Councillor Van Dyke, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm sorry if this is the wrong place in the presentation to ask this question. I'm just guessing by where we are in the slides. I know that a couple of years ago, I think it was in our first year when we were looking at budget amendments and talking about budgets, there was a formalized ranking system, a point system that had been developed with a consultant. And I know that there was going to be changes to that, either a new system or a redo of that one. Is that still the system that is in use when you work on these projects, or how, is there a formal process in which you rank them?
Absolutely, yeah. Maybe I flip back to that previous slide. So when we get to the ranked by the ranking committee section, so we have applied, it's a little bit of a different criteria than what was created by the consultants. We looked at our corporate planning and performance area led by Sarosh up in the stands today. Maybe he has more to say on this. But this is something that we looked at and evaluated. We determined that the measure that we were using in previous cycles was a little bit too subjective. There were some components of it, for example, population served and some of the net financial impacts that were largely skewing that formula. And it seemed best for us to move away from it and move to something else. So our director from that area, from CPP, went through and did a lot of research on different methods that we could utilize, and our ELT settled on one that would focus on weighting based on our strategic priorities. And so that's what we used. There was 2 teams that were set up, ranked the 82 cases in total. And then that was brought together and provided to our executive leadership. And that was their basis point. That was their starting point when they were considering which items to recommend to you today.
So I think it had been the plan to go on a break, but we're a little bit early for that. So if you'd like to continue, that would work for all of us.
Okay. Great. I may need a little bit of assistance from Steph if she's around. Did she? Okay. There's a little bit of a segue here.
Sorry, Managing Director Egger, you go ahead.
That's fine. So through the chair, I know there's a little bit of setup here for the next section. Even if we could take just a short 5-minute break would be appreciated.
Sure, I think that's fine. Is that fine with everybody? I don't know. All right, we are ready to take a break now, and then we'll get you set up and come back. What length of break suits everybody here? Go ahead.
I think 15 minutes would be appropriate, Chairperson Robinson.
That's one option. Does everyone agree that 15 minutes is appropriate, or you think a little bit longer is suitable? Nope. I'm happy with 15 minutes, but I know that sometimes when we rush, that's not helpful. So if others have a different idea, that's fine with me. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, is that what was originally scheduled, was a 15-minute break? Okay,
Yes.
then I'm fine with that, thank you.
All right, 15 minutes it is. We'll be back here at 5 after 5. All right, thanks everyone for your patience while we took our break, and looking forward to hearing more from you, Mr. Heimer.
We're going to start.
Medicine Hat has a lot to be proud of. We've been blessed with natural beauty, 330 days of sunshine, and a prosperous energy industry that has all accumulated to the wealth of this community. For many years, we've enjoyed low property taxes and low utility charges as compared to other municipalities in Alberta and across Canada. But today, we're facing some unique challenges. So as part of the Alberta energy industry, we're facing some very challenging legislation coming out from other levels of government related to energy transition to net zero. So at the same time, we're seeing some pressures of our city infrastructure, some which is 50 years old and some which goes back to the founding of our city. We're also seeing some unique socio-economic challenges of members of our community that we've never seen before. So unlike other communities in Canada, we've been blessed with financial reserves that we've accumulated over the years from our energy business. But as we look forward with energy transition, with the requirements for our infrastructure going forward, recreational facilities, we do not have enough financial reserves to cover everything. So to ensure that our community remains vibrant, we need to continue to invest in our assets and look at other opportunities of growth to ensure that the community remains a community of choice for residents and newcomers as well. So these new growth opportunities that we're proposing will ensure that we're investing in the right places. That includes services, infrastructure, and quality of life for residents of Medicine Hat. Our approach ensures that we are maintaining adequate fiscal targets going forward that ensures the sustainability of our city, which includes we're able to meet the obligations and opportunities going forward and ensures that we have a reasonable, small incremental tax increases going forward as well. No one wants to pay more at a time like this, and we understand that. But the cost of maintaining and operating a municipality such as City of Medicine Hat is increasing. So let's fund the type of Medicine Hat that we all can be proud of.
I'm here to talk about the 25-26 budget and the development incentives. Economic Development Medicine Hat is looking for $2.6 million to help us increase our housing stock and to diversify it. That means money for downtown redevelopment, infill, those types of initiatives to help us have more affordable and diverse housing. We're looking forward to your support to get this approved through the budget process.
What I'm here to talk to you about today is the $6.3 million Kipling main twinning project that's before you for deliberation. This project is critical infrastructure to our water distribution system, and as you can see, it will be flowing right directly beneath our feet here toward the Kipling booster station. So this project basically affects about 30,000 water consumers south of us here in Kincooley. Rest assured, we've taken all steps necessary to make prudent recommendations to Council for your consideration. We do believe the time is now for the Kipling twinning project.
Good evening, Council. We wanted to talk to you about one particular budget initiative that we have an ask in for. But before we get to that, really wanted to share from a divisional perspective, we had very few asks in this budget cycle, and that's recognizing that we have longer term pressures coming at us, particularly facing into energy transition that we know will be quite an expensive requirement for us to deliver into. So with that, one of our asks really relates to our environmental framework, which we know is critical for how we build that resiliency going forward. And this one relates to water, which is a key priority area for our environmental framework. So with specifics, I'll ask Kevin to speak to it.
We want to build upon those goals and targets, particularly with a water management strategy focused on watershed protection, water conservation initiatives, and really understand the ability to deliver water and pursue economic development opportunities for the city, and really get a clear picture on what our volumes are available should we pursue water-heavy industries.
Good evening, Council. I'm talking to you from Gas City Campground. In our budget submission this year, we've got a new kind of glamping that we are proposing. Innovative thinkers in Parks and Recreation are requesting that we install 2 yurts here at Gas City Campground and 1 at Equidale Campground. Yurts or an in-demand camping experience. These are the kind of things that will bring new tourism dollars into our community and improve the quality of life for residents and even our visitors here. If we create a place where people want to visit, then maybe they'll want to live here. And if we create a place where people want to live, then they'll want to work here. And if we create a place where people want to work, then we'll have business and investors that want to invest in our community.
So in this world of digital transformation, we're seeing many opportunities for us to continually improve how we operate within this organization. Of the many corporate service initiatives that we're proposing, the one I'm particularly proud of is the collaboration ecosystem. This project is significantly focused on unlocking the potential with our Microsoft module and unlocking certain features and tools that are currently not available. Collaboration is an important feature of how we interact within the organization. There's 4 areas where we would be advancing. The first is the creation of a record management strategy. The second area is to leverage the consolidation of cybersecurity tools that will mitigate our risk and also resources required going forward. The third area of benefit that we see is the consolidation of advanced tools related to data, visualization, business intelligence. And the fourth area, which I'm really excited about, is the opportunity to automate some business processes that we have within the organization. We are confident that this initiative will have a positive impact on our organization. It will allow us to enable those in the organization to better serve the community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Great, thank you so much. We thought that would be kind of a fun way to get started on our new growth opportunities, bring a little bit of energy back after the break. We're really excited about the things that we're bringing forward for you today. I hope that you're excited as well. These are opportunities for us as a community to move forward, to help shape our city in a positive way. And as you saw in the video, the level of expertise, the level of thought, the level of care that has gone into all of the requests that have been brought forward to you today. So we're going to jump right into it then. Thank you to the communications team who has put that video together for us. That was really great. Okay. So we're going to start by talking about new growth opportunities in light of our council strategic priorities. In 25-26, city administration is recommending $36.4 million of capital investment over the 2 years into council strategic priorities, including $6.6 million of operating expense in 25 and $3 million in 26. One of the key budget commitments that we had, that we mentioned at the beginning, was to align with council's strategic priorities. The new growth opportunities that we are showing with you is one of the ways that we're fulfilling that commitment, as well as the council feedback from the previous budget cycle that asked for clearer delineation or clear tie between our council strategic priorities and the initiatives that we're putting forward. So that's what we are sharing with you today. And I just want to highlight as well that while we have bucketed these opportunities based on basically a strategy of best fit, priority of best fit, a lot of these opportunities could fall into multiple categories. So just to keep that in mind, that we're, if we have an innovation project, that consider the ways that this might help advance the other priorities that you have as well. Before we get into the details of those cases, I do want to as well mention the impact from a business unit perspective. So as you'll remember, our city is broken down into various business units, including municipal, land development and real estate, our rate-based utilities group, and the energy production group. Up on the screen, you'll see each one of those has a little icon beside it. Those will be used throughout the presentation to indicate which project is tied to which type of business unit. So the municipal is the gray city hall there. Land and development is the geo symbol, and then the pipes there for rate-based utilities, and the fire for energy. So what we want to highlight with this, one of the reasons we said that we're breaking things down into these business units for you, is that each one of these business units has a key decision element to it. From a financial perspective, there's a discrete financial decision that is made at each one of these different intersections of our financial information. And for example, with municipal, this is the group that is supported through our tax base. Rate-based are those groups that are cost recovery, that utilize that Alberta Utilities Commission style model for setting rates. And so the more that we increase the costs in those areas, those are cost recovery areas, those have increases to or potential impacts to our rates as well as our property tax. So with that in mind, the proposals that we're bringing forward to you today, we have on the right-hand side just the overall impact of the requirements that, or the impact of what we're bringing forward to you today. It can get a little bit complex when we're looking at capital and operating. We just kind of wanted to tie that together. What is the impact to our rates? What's the impact to property taxes? So on the property tax side, the investments that we're proposing include 7.6 or 7.7 million in municipal growth capital, as well as 6.2 million of 25 operating and 3.2 million of 2026 operating in the municipal business unit. And this would equate to about a 2% tax increase, both in 2025 and 2026, with a draw on our operating reserve of about $4.5 million over that same period. The rate-based utilities, the impact of water, we're proposing $9 million of capital to invest into our water utility, including $600,000 of 2025 operating and then $5,000 in 2026. The overall estimated impact to our water rates over that entire period would be 4%. And again, the impact of that may not be felt in one complete year, depending on when that capital is in place and ready to use. But that would be the overall impact as a result of those investments. Sewer rates is 2.48%. Solid waste is coming in at 4.57%, and then electric distribution is at 0.1% overall. So again, the timing of these impacts may change. We also want to mention as well that what you're seeing here is the rate impacts. It's just the rate impacts tied to the new growth opportunities. It's not the overall property tax rate impact or the overall estimated rate-based utility impact that we'll bring back to you when we come back in November, which will bring together the second tier, but also the base operating pressures as well that we had indicated. This 2.03, though, that you are seeing on the screen is built into the 5.6% property tax estimate that we had provided earlier. So just to clarify that, we're not indicating with the rates that you're seeing on the screen that this is where we're going to land if we go forward with these. This is an estimate of the impact for these particular decision items up on the screen. So we understand that affordability, we understand that there are affordability issues for the city. However, affordability is not the only issue that our city is facing. There are social, economic, infrastructure challenges as well. And what we're trying to represent with what you're seeing up on the screen is the principle of cost versus benefit. The principle states that an action should be taken if the benefits outweigh the costs. We're about to walk through a bunch of new growth activities that we have for the city. And as we do, it'll be like walking down a road with a ditch on either side. On the one side, we can focus solely on the benefits and forget that there is a real cost attached that must be borne by the taxpayer or the ratepayer. This is illustrated up on the screen. The other ditch is that we focus solely on the cost and disregard the benefits that could potentially be had for this community. So we're walking that fine line in between both of those ditches. Ultimately, we believe that ratepayers as well as taxpayers are not opposed to tax increases for things that will provide benefit to them and to the community. Using the cost-benefit principle, then, the goal as we review these new opportunities is to find that right balance that optimizes the benefits to the community within the cost constraints of affordability. This is what we are calling a balanced budget and is in alignment with our budget commitment to balance affordability with the needs to invest in city infrastructure and operations. Before we begin, I also want to make the an awareness of the longer-term impact of what we are proposing to you as well. Across all of our business units, new growth opportunities are estimated to result in approximately 2.7 million of ongoing operating costs by 2028, and that's 2.7 across all of our business units, which include municipal as well as land development rate-based. So these aren't solely borne by the municipal or the tax base, but it gives you a bit of a picture of if we go forward with this, we are adding to that cost base that must be recovered. It should be noted that many of the pressures on the municipal side have been solved already through our budget gap mitigation effort, that 5.6% increase that we're proposing. Okay, then we'll jump right into the new growth opportunities that we are proposing to you today. We're going to go through starting with innovation, and then we'll work through each one of the council's strategic priorities. And I'll just give a little bit of a intro to each one of those. There's more detail on every single one of these in the compendium package as a part of your council package that has been provided. So for innovation, we're proposing 9.5 million capital for the food waste compost facility to allow all residents to participate in citywide composting efforts, which helps reduce greenhouse emissions and extends the useful life of our landfill. 1 million for an underutilized land analysis, which aims to encourage developers to infill by de-risking them, helping them to use old vacant lots across the city in alignment with strong town principles. 610,000 operating expense in 25, with 536 in 26 for the city's advanced collaboration ecosystem designed to modernize the city's record management system. This project has many benefits for the city, which will help us become more efficient and more productive. 40,000 operating expense in 2025 to perform an airport socioeconomic impact study to accurately quantify the airport's contribution to our region. This will help the airport communicate its unique value to our region so that we can better advocate for funding and improve government relationships. 150,000 to establish weather stations that can be used by our snow and ice removal crews to predict weather patterns and be more responsive to the areas of the city that need servicing. 150 operating expense in 25 and 26 for a data and analytics strategy and development to help the city centralize its data. Centralized data is the key to better decision-making so that we can optimize resources and ultimately be more effective in our service delivery to residents. 69,000 capital for a public safety camera for the police to help reduce violence and crime in the downtown core. 20,000 capital for an additional uncrewed aerial vehicle to continue a pilot program that began in 2020. UAVs have been proven to be an effective tool in aiding investigations and enhancing safety during critical incidents. Moving on to community wellness. We're proposing 150,000 in capital for a community programming kit, which includes durable tents, mobile stage, and sound systems so that we can increase our cultural public programming and events. 60,000 operating expense in 25 and 26 to increase community vibrancy grant funding so that we can support more local organizations that promote a sense of belonging, community, and well-being in the city of Medicine Hat. 150,000 operating expense in 25 and 250 in 26 for the community well-being plan implementation to enact the action steps to be identified in the community well-being plan anticipated for completion in Q1 of 2025. $6.4 million capital for the Kipling Street Southeast Transmission Main Twinning Project to provide a secondary water line as a backup to the Kipling Booster Station. This booster station is responsible for supplying 1/3 of Hatters with water. $400,000 capital for pedestrian connectivity to install new sidewalks and accessibility ramps that fill gaps in our current pedestrian network in alignment with the city's active transportation plan strategy. $300,000 capital, including $10,000 in operating expense in 25 and 26 to implement water services to increase the tree canopy, providing shade and wind protection at the city's pump track. $1.45 million capital for roadway upgrades to construct a multi-use pathway along 3rd Street Northeast Northwest to address pedestrian safety concerns. $150 capital for street light improvements and $2,000 operating expense in 26 to fill gaps in lighting throughout the city, improving roadway visibility to increase safety for both vehicles and pedestrians. $30,000 operating expense in 25 and $31,000 in 26 for community programming at Town Square to help promote the use of this beautiful space. $200,000 operating expense in 25 for a traffic safety enhancement pilot program to implement traffic safety design features as identified in our transportation safety strategy. And continuing with community wellness, $125,000 operating expense in 25 and 26 for trail crack sealing to be proactive about maintaining our city's trail system. $285,000 in capital and an estimated net earnings of $12,000 per year in 25 and 26 to establish yurts at Echodale and the Gas City Campground. $296,000 operating expense in 25 and $304,000 in 26 for 2 hybrid downtown patrol units / community liaison officers to address multiple community needs, including the need for greater police presence in our downtown core, as well as increased crime prevention and community engagement opportunities. Economic evolution. $100,000 in operating expense in 25 and $102,000 in 26 for air service and commercial attraction and retention marketing plan, aimed at retaining and attracting new air services, aviation businesses, and non-aeronautical concessionaires to the airport. $1.15 million capital for downtown service upgrades to revitalize the streetscape downtown, making it safer and more attractive place to visit, shop, live, and work. $75,000 operating expense in 2025 for business retention and expansion project to run 2 to 4 business retention and expansion studies per year to identify local businesses' existing and anticipated needs and address those needs with coordinated resources, partnerships, and tools. $200,000 operating expense in 2025 for the investment attraction strategy and action plan, which will help the city to be prepared to know what types of industries to attract and key opportunities for those industries. $2.6 million in operating expense in 2025 for the development incentive program to offer incentives to housing developers, encouraging property development or redevelopment within the city that would otherwise not occur. Partnerships and governance, $4.95 million for the Briar Park Gravity Bypass, which is the second last phase in the development of the newer sewer network to support future growth in the northwest sector of our city as well as the town of Redcliffe. $325,000 operating expense in 2025 for a citywide water management strategy to understand how the corporation manages water consumption, determines water utility rates, and understands potential industrial economic development. $76,000 operating expense in 25 and $78,000 in 26 for a school resource officer in police to enhance the overall safety and support of youth in the community with the support of the school system. Resilience and sustainability. $504,000 capital in electric services upgrades for the purchase of transformers that will help the higher service capacity anticipated as the city moves towards electrification and renewable energy sources. 1.5 million capital for landfill airspace optimization to complete the engineering and conceptual design for the landfill expansion. Actual construction is proposed for 27-28 and will add approximately 15 years of airspace to the landfill. 468,000 capital and 181 operating expense in 25 and 111 in 26 for cybersecurity upgrades to enhance security of the systems that oversee our drinking and wastewater. 600,000 operating expense for the updating of the water treatment plant master plan, which is required to update and replace the city's UV disinfection system and enact any requirements under the environmental framework. 50,000 in capital and 5,000 in operating expense in 25, with 5,000 again in 26 for a larger capacity tandem water truck to maintain moisture requirements for composting, fire control, and dust suppression at the landfill. 48,000 operating expense in 25 and 49,000 in 26 for an airport maintenance specialist to provide better coverage of maintenance services at the airport. 250,000 operating expense in 25 for business process optimization and enhancements that aim to improve the city's financial system and automate time-intensive manual processes. 50,000 operating expense in 25 and 26 for fire and emergency services, health and wellness program to bolster mental health resiliency, including counseling following traumatic incidents. 116,000 operating expense in 25 and 119 in 26 for an operational technology systems analyst to enhance metering infrastructure reliability and prevent disruptions, supporting consistent and accurate utility services for residents. $1 million in capital for energy-efficient component upgrades to install high-efficiency lighting and plumbing features in city facilities with the aim of reducing emissions and water usage. 520,000 capital and 5,000 operating expense in 25 and 7,000 in 26 for the purchase of a materials storage shed that will allow the airport to save money through bulk buying their traction control and de-icing materials that are used to keep runways clean. Service orientation. 1.8 million capital for new gas and electric services for installing new gas and electric distribution to new parcels of land. 550,000 capital and 4,000 operating expense in 25 and 7,000 in 26 for the purchase of a grader to assist with the completing of airside maintenance tasks in the airport, such as snow clearing, grading, and ditch repair. 1.39 million capital for 3rd Street water mains replacement in the 300 and 400 blocks to replace existing end-of-life water mains for river flats with a larger main and install a second water main to improve service to the Southeast Hill. 1.25 million capital for the Harlow Water Transmission Main Interconnect to install a large diameter water main from 1st Street Southwest to Harlow River Crossing to ensure water supply resilience to the north side of the river. 97,000 operating expense in 2026 for an airport safety and security coordinator responsible for ensuring airport regulatory compliance with Canadian aviation regulations. 180,000 operating expense in 2025 and 348,000 operating expense in 2026 for the Cybersecurity Maturity Program to bolster the city's cybersecurity defenses, safeguarding both city operations and residents' data from the risk of cybersecurity attacks. 150,000 operating expense in 26 for traffic signal coordination along Dunmore Road to provide better traffic flow, reduce delays, and enhance vehicle pedestrian safety. 250,000 capital and 2,000 operating expense in 2026 to replace the old hotbox roadway repair truck with a larger model, which would result in more efficient road crews. 206,000 operating expense in 25 and $411,000 in 26 for a special transit service adjustment to provide 2 full-time special transit shifts, which will address current demands for service and prepare for anticipated unmet needs. Continuing with service orientation, $750,000 capital and $160,000 operating expense in 25 and $161,000 operating expense in 26 for a regular transit service adjustment to provide an additional 3,120 annual fixed route hours to meet the demand, which could be used for the extension of weekend services, Samus Heights peak service, and or adding stat holiday services. $250,000 capital and $16,000 operating expense in 2026 for an asphalt recycler to provide road crew workers with hot mix asphalt year-round when plants are closed and provide longer-lasting asphalt repairs compared to the cold mix alternative. $40,000 for the emergency management equipment trailer to expedite the transport of equipment required to safely and effectively establish a formal incident command post and emergency coordination center. $91,000 operating expense in 2025 and $93,000 operating expense in 2026 for a full-time training and competency assurance coordinator to deliver structured and consistent training to reduce the risk of employee injury and equipment damage in the Parks Department. $77,000 capital for a mass spectrometer for fire and emergency services to correctly identify and mitigate hazardous materials, as well as assist in arson investigations, field testing, drug identification, and explosive residue analysis. $100,000 capital and $15,000 operating expense in 25 and 26 for a pickup truck at the airport to address friction testing redundancy concerns, improve emergency response capabilities, and reduce spending on contracted sanding services. And that is all of the items that we are recommending today. Those are all 55 of them. We also want to make mention of the items that we have deferred. Up on the screen, we do have 2 of note that I will talk about here, as well as 25 other opportunities which are in your compendium. You can take a look at your leisure, and if there are any of those opportunities that you'd like to ask more questions about, we can certainly do so at the July 9th meeting. The City of Medicine Hat, in the 23-24 budget cycle, provided $1 million of funding to HALO to operate in 23-24. The funding was considered a temporary measure that was to be revisited in future years. Administration acknowledges the importance of the service and the life-saving work that they do. However, there was some concern around the jurisdictional responsibility surrounding HALO, which receives about 29% of its funding from the province, whereas other helicopter services such as STARS just recently signed a contract with the province that's providing up to about 50% of their operation. In addition, administration feels that it would be best for HALO to make its own request for funding as opposed to rolling forward the previously approved amount. With regard to the fair entry program, the portion that we are specifically not recommending for the 25-26 budget cycle is that fair entry credit relief program that was administered through utility bills. The city recognizes that there is a continued need for support of the city's most vulnerable, and the program will continue to provide subsidies, as I mentioned before, for admission to city-owned facilities, transit, and some educational services. The fair entry credit was a temporary measure in a trying time of uncertain economic conditions during high inflation with regard to food, energy, and housing. In addition, other federal and provincial programs have now ceased as well. The reason that we bring these 2 forward to you specifically is because we wanted to highlight them, since we do believe that Council would like to weigh in on the discussion more directly about these 2 items. The opportunity is here to extend these programs for an additional 2 years into the 25-26 budget if desired. However, since both of these items are within the municipal budget, there would be tax implications if we were not to, again, remove other items to make way for them. And just as an estimate, I did do some estimating on this. The combined total for the two, if we were to simply add them, would be about a 1% tax increase in 25 and 26. Okay, with that, I'll just conclude with next steps, and then I'll open the floor for discussion and questions. So just as a note for next steps, you have the compendium package within your council meeting package. The intention would be to review that and come back prepared on July 9th with any and all questions that you have regarding the opportunities that we presented before you, including the opportunities that we deferred or other opportunities that you were expecting but maybe didn't see. This is that opportunity to bring those things forward. On July 9th, we will, after this question period, depending on the questions that come, we may, if they're more technical in nature, we will take those away. So don't not ask those questions today. We'll just take those back. Our directors aren't here today. We'll take them back, and they'll be the first thing that we address when we come forward on July 9th. We'll give an opportunity for council to ask questions to administration, and then we'll give an opportunity for council amongst themselves to debate the merits of the list and to talk about items to move on or to take off. And then on July 15th, we'll come back at regular council and give an opportunity for an official motion to add or remove things from the list. And the intention of that is not to approve budget. We're not approving budget on July 15th, but what we want to do is we want to get a clear understanding of the will of council so that we can help to prepare that budget for the end of the year for you. So these are the next steps that we've included for you. And with that, I will open the floor to questions. And I'll just again mention that our directors aren't here. If there are technical questions related to the projects, I'll leave it at the discretion of the managing directors whether they would prefer to defer that until the next meeting or whether they're prepared to answer that at this time. With that, any questions?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. We do have several councillors who have questions. I'm just going to say, just for the sake of the record of the proceedings, that Councillor Van Dyke, or not Van Dyke, sorry, Councillor Knodel left the meeting before our break, and Mayor Clark left the meeting and hasn't returned after the break. So just so you know, there's no questions going to come from online, and I think the meeting minutes should show that they were not present for this conversation or these questions. And of course, these are going to be questions, not opinions, and I think everybody knows that. So I'll start with Councillor Hirsch.
Thanks. Fairly long description, but obviously appreciate the background, so get a drink of water if you get a chance. I've got three questions. Actually, they're all over the place, to be honest. So if in the next steps, you had indicated that we're going to talk about items that made it onto the list. Are we actually going to be reviewing line by line of all the asks that you just went through? Like, is that the game plan, or are we going to go? What's the procedure on that? I guess maybe that's where I'll start.
Well, what we're planning on doing is the slides that you saw up on the screen where we broke down by council priority. We'll bring those back up on the screen, and then that'll give an opportunity for you. If you have questions about that, then we'll just kind of use that as a way of kind of going through things methodically. But if there are no questions on a particular item, then we'll just move on to the next one.
Okay.
We'll consider the list to be the recommended list unless there are requests to amend.
Gotcha. Okay. Second question, in your methodology, when you looked at because there's a few staffing asks going forward. How many in total, by the way?
I don't have the numbers right in front of me. They are found in the compendium. I think it's around 10.
Okay.
Roughly 10.
So. And in that methodology on arriving on the need for that, is there, and you alluded to a couple of them where you added a body because well, I guess I'll just go get to the question. So in the methodology, do you consider like the ability for fee-for-service, contracted services, instead of a long, permanent operation cost in terms of a full-time equivalent, so.
Thank you for the question. I think that would be contingent on the particular business
Each one,
case.
yeah.
Yeah, so for example, with the yurts, for example, there is a revenue model where they are showing some net income, actually. So it's actually a decrease to the operating bottom line for those ones. So there are some where we identified, for example, with our electric distribution and gas distribution, there are opportunities for third-party funding. So we are including those, as well as grant opportunities. What we try to do with some of those things is to be relatively conservative, because it's obviously easier for us to say we got a grant after the fact than it is to come back, because then, you know, you're looking for council approval to, we said we were going to get grant funding and now we don't, so now we're on the hook for additional funding. So we don't want that kind of story. So we try to be as conservative as we can when we're identifying third-party funding availability. As far as the fee-for-service, I don't have any in mind right now that specifically identified that, but that would probably be more on a case-by-case basis.
And maybe, so thanks for that. Maybe I should be more clear. Like, when there's a consideration for a full-time ad, is the methodology to review existing service providers looking at it as on a contract basis instead of full-time, permanent, that will be with us? I really pay attention to operating capital because that's with us forever. So I'd like to understand that. So in your matrix or when you review from these different departments, is there consideration for in either outside reliance, contracted, or fee-for-service rather than continual full-time employment?
That is an excellent question. I see that.
City Manager Mitchell.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off, but just through the chair, one of the things too, and I know we've had some conversations with Director Koch, and we do look at that, but we do have to methodically go through a workforce strategy, which is something that we will be doing organizationally throughout the end of this year and through next year, and going through each department. But you are correct, Councillor Hirsch, we do look at every time what is the best way forward to provide this service. And we need to always be thinking in a, I don't want to, in a business mindset, like how can we provide this service the most efficiently? And I'm like you, I'm always concerned with, are we adding operational costs? So one thing we will be doing outside of this budget is looking at each area and looking at the workforce. I'll pick on the solicitors because Ben's not here. So looking at what we kind of work we do in-house and the kind of work we contract out, and how effective is that, and what's the bottom line in the cost. So we do that, and we have encouraged it through the budget process, but we will be doing more of that through the operational, through the next year as well too. Because I'm like you, I always worry, because if you're adding staffing, that's permanent.
Right. I appreciate that. My final question is relative to the pump track, actually, which is not that material, but I do recall that was a COVID-funded federal government allowance, and there was many strings to that, including that it wasn't supposed to attract operating capital, and in this case it is. So can I understand, are we in compliance? Are we, what is that going to look like going forward?
Madam Chair, I think I can answer that.
Go ahead, if City Manager Mitchell, you'd like him to answer it? Great.
Through the chair, so we did look into the requirements around the capital that we got through the stimulus funding to build the pump track itself. We are allowed to do enhancements in the area. We can also add on to the pump track. That location does allow us an opportunity to build out, whether it's we have a beginner and an intermediate level pump track. We could add a hard or a red level to use their color scheme. But what we're trying to do there, we put a shade sail that's been installed, and it's in the process. We've got the shade sail going to come in now, but we've got the 4 poles if you go out there to the pump track. So we've been adding on to it to make it like a better user experience when people go out there. It's quite hot in the middle of summer out there. So to bring in a water service, we can also irrigate trees. So it'll provide some natural shade. It does not impact our stimulus funding. So we've gone through finance and they've gone through and looked back through the requirements of what we can and cannot do. This structure itself, we have the way it was constructed was it shouldn't need ongoing operating costs. Obviously, things over time do need to be replaced. We've seen that with all of our assets. But as far as adding around that amenity, we can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Sharps next.
Thank you, and through the chair. So I will have a more detailed list of questions. I wanted to actually hear your presentation today before I came up with all my questions, and good thing I did because some of them were answered. But I did just have a few things to touch on. So my one concern was the staffing, so I'm glad Councillor Hirsch brought that up because that's always a question that we get from the community, and justly so. So I love the way you have this all written out with the strategic priorities, but I have a question. Do we also have it written out in just ask amount from top to bottom?
Absolutely, we can provide that.
I would love that if possible. I don't know if it's on an Excel, if it's possible to get it either that way or either by amount asked or by division. Yeah, that would be okay. I do like this, but I guess my mind is also wanting to tie to see if one division's getting way more, or is there a better balance? Not that you didn't, but I need to be able to, as you know, we'll be held accountable to this in the community, so we need to be able to answer those questions. Town Square. So again, kind of the same question as Councillor Hirsch, except for I know that I believe it was Managing Director Stout came to us about 3 or 4 months ago and asked to do a little bit of a pilot, okay, to see if we could get the use out. So do we want to get the results from that pilot before we keep investing into this area? I personally would like to see the results of a pilot.
I'm just going to say that the analysis of this year is on the Q4 Public Services Committee list of things to discuss. And so it has a due date and a committee it belongs to a committee outstanding item list. City Manager Mitchell, did you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you through the chair, and you covered most of it, Councillor Robbins. But the other piece too is we should make sure that we kind of have an idea with the uptake. So I will talk to James will follow up with Managing Director Stout, just to see, to note that we're not going to make these decisions until October, November, but we will make sure you at least have first 3 quarters, and we can get you that.
I appreciate that. I am aware it's on the oil list, but I've also been watching down there. So, I mean, if it's going good and the community's using it, I will 100% support it. If we're the ones using the programming and try to entice that isn't the same category of what we were trying to use it for and seeing if so again, as a counselor that's going to go through this, I would personally, if it's being used, I'm in. If it's not, then I want that information before I ever agree to it. So just so you're aware of the kind of questions that I'm going to be asking. So my question to you through the city manager is, do you want these questions in advance at all? Or are you happy on July 9th? I bet you would.
If you have things that you are already ready to ask, you could feel free to ask them here or provide them after the fact and we'll touch on them for sure.
Okay, so my only request if we do that is that they are published for the community. So, because I think they need that transparency of all the questions. Because I don't want to bombard you without clearly going, because again, I will more than likely, like I did last year, watch these presentations again because it's finance, right? So you kind of have to pay attention to everything that you're saying. So I'd like to go back through it and listen to it one more time before I ask you all my questions. And that way we're not wasting anybody's time. Are you good with that?
Yes, I think that would be wise. And we can certainly provide that listing either on the city website or with the council package, whatever
as long as it's transparent, I'm good. Thank you.
City Manager, do you want to add something?
Yes, through the chair, I just, to make sure that those council members that aren't in attendance, I will send up a follow-up email just saying, by what time and how long to get me your questions, and I will forward it through. Thank you.
Thank you for that offer, City Manager Mitchell. I didn't want to leave anyone out, so Moving on, Councillor Van Dyke is on my list next.
Thank you through the chair. So I have a couple of questions that I know you're not going to be able to answer this evening, but I'm asking them now so that we can have the information come back. So I noticed there's a few equipment requests for both police and fire. And I read through the full package and I couldn't find it in any of the reports on these items, but I wondered if this equipment is standard to services in other communities, or are these specific to what we're looking for in our community? It would help me to make a decision if I knew that this is equipment being used in other communities that have a similar service or not. So that was one. I'm wondering if we could have the fair entry usage numbers for that program. I'm curious to know, I know they're different for every different category of fair entry, so if we could know how many people utilized that funding year by year in the past. And then I noticed there was also a lot of asks coming out of the airport, both equipment and there's a staffing and some other stuff as well. And I'm wondering if that is a result of any of the reviews or studies that were being done. How were these identified? Or is this typical to see this many asks come out of one division? Thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question? With regard to the fair entry, the item that's up on the list is just that rebate utility that was provided through the utility bill, but you're looking for utilization for all of the services that are?
Just that one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Dyke. Oh, City Manager Mitchell, yes.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll follow up with Managing Director Bohan, but there was some through the safety management system, and we were behind, and now we have caught up, so there may have been some of that, but we'll double check with Managing Director Bohan to get back to you. Okay.
Thank you very much, both of you, for that. I have Councillor Hyder on the speakers list next.
Thank you, Councillor Robbins, through the chair. Aaron, thank you for your time and put into this report and request. It's a lot of work and I appreciate that. Just maybe I didn't hear your answer. So is this how it will be presented to us later on? The way it's itemized and things like this is how it will look, or?
That's the intention. So in the next meeting, we'll come back and we'll just go through the same, not the whole slide deck, just the slide decks that touch on the initiatives, and just bring one up at a time. And that'll just provide a bit of a schedule so that we can follow through and make sure that if there's questions that we can answer those for you. I think that's kind of the method that we were looking at doing. We want to give opportunity for any and all questions. It's just kind of a method of the mayhem for how to sort the questions and our time. So.
Yeah, for sure. So I do have just to voice it, I guess here, I do have concerns about the staffing, the new numbers for that. But I do have one question. If you can clarify, there's lots of things on here that I'm going to have to review and look over because I really don't even know what they are. But one I'd like to know is community programming kit, and also a community well-being plan implementation. If you could just tell me or explain to me a community programming kit, and you said something about a tent. So could you just help me understand what that is?
Madam Chair, I think I can answer this question. That's all right.
Yeah, no, please do. I was just looking for the detailed note myself, but you go ahead and answer.
Thank you very much, through the chair. So the community programming kit for community development would be the purchase of tents, a mobile stage, and a sound system to support events. We run into situations where we need to track down equipment and be able to provide it to community groups that are looking to host an event. If it's something like Together Again, or a festival like that, that equipment would then be available, or even smaller events within a park space, within a band shelter, that we could provide that sound system and tents that would be more sturdy than maybe things that people could rent, and maybe wouldn't have the ability to fund that. So in some cases, my understanding is that we could rent that out, or it could be provided to community groups. So it would be kind of a whole package that we could say, this is how we would put on an event. We'd have this equipment that we would be able to loan out or rent out to groups to support those events.
Okay. Yeah, and just, oh, sorry, James, go ahead.
Go ahead. So I was going to answer your next question about the community wellbeing plan.
Yeah, yeah.
So the community wellbeing plan, it's a plan that's obviously it's a fairly large encompassing plan when it deals with all aspects of community well-being. So it could be issues around homelessness, it could be around drug use, it could be around access to mental health services in the community. The plan over the number of years going forward, so we're projecting out to 2028 and ongoing, that there are action items similar to the action items that we would see in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan that would come out that need to be funded. Some of them would be within the departmental operating budget. What's forecast, even though we're only in the plan initial stages of development in public services, that what we're seeing as an outcome would be action items that would likely exceed the department's operating budget ability to handle those. So you'd see action items around if it's a homelessness program, or if it's an initiative around drug use, and maybe that we see in our park spaces sometimes, that isn't something that's already embedded within an operating budget within community development department. So these are projections at this point further on. The 2-year plan, the operating costs, because the plan isn't finalized there, with a consultant's input would be our best estimate at this point in time.
Okay, and like we've clarified, facilities for the future isn't included in any of this. Okay. Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I have Councillor Hirsch next, but Councillor Dumanowski hasn't had his time yet. So I leave it to the two of you to duke it out and say who's going next.
You're such a gentleman, Councillor Hirsch. Thank you. You know what? This isn't a point for commentary, but my question does require a short preamble. I mean, the weighting and recommendations that the staff behind the scenes endeavored to work through and which derived to the list that we're looking at right now, obviously is eloquently and appropriately identified under the strategic priorities that council had identified, and kind of to someone else's question around departments, et cetera. I like the way it's written, but and it's less about having them in departments in totality so I can draw comparisons, because that's less important to me. It's more around when I see it here, and the way it's presented, and I'm not criticizing it, it's all equally weighted, so to speak. It's here, so it's present, and it doesn't really, some of them are more straightforward for me. Some of them are curious to me, and some of them require more understanding and unpacking. So I'm trying to understand for myself how the next kind of part of this process will allow for department heads to maybe do that, to not to see who's the best debater here, who is best at and most eloquent at supporting their recommendations through their department, but to help give some nuance to it so that I can have a better appreciation of them. Because right now, when I look at them, this is like going to the grocery store and getting 5 items, but then I see some yogurt and I think, yeah, I probably should grab some of that. And then I see some apples, hey, they look fresh, I'll grab some of those. Strawberries are in season, but which of them were really the ones that I really needed, and which ones were the ones that made the list, but only because of the opportunity present itself rather than the true grit and weighting of them, if that makes sense. So trail crack sealing, straightforward, yurts, I know what they are, but I'm going, what? So I will want, I guess what I'm saying is I will want to understand that. And so my question then is, will there be opportunity for individual staff directors, managing directors to kind of speak to the pieces that are coming out of their department, not to see who's better at defending it, but who can satisfy my questions around kind of the weighting from their deliberations that we were not part of. Because right now they're just listed, they're all black and white, and they all have equal weighting. I'm seeking more depth and maybe some some of the emotional appeal that comes with some of these, and I'm wondering if that opportunity will be available.
Yeah, thank you for that point, and we'll definitely take that into consideration as we plan for the July 9th. We'll try to attempt to satisfy that desire. Yeah.
Councillor Hirsch, you waited so patiently.
Well, it was nothing. I do have a question, so we chat a little bit about different asks, and I'm kind of maybe on the heels a little bit on my other question relative to thought and matrix and that sort of thing. And this one question that just popped, actually I was meaning to talk about it, was the infrastructure asks. I saw that they're heavily weighted into this next capital year, or I guess it's, actually it looks 25 and 26, so sorry, apologize for that. Regardless, my question is, I get on the heels of the Calgary water main issue, I get it. The one thing I found very interesting though, is that the break was in a pipe of a 100-year lifespan expectation, and it broke at year 42. So for me, it feels like that's just a fail. It wasn't of that particular pipe, not necessarily fail of planning. So my question becomes, when we look at our own infrastructure, to what weighting are we looking at the lifespan? Or are we, I equate it by, you buy a new truck or you buy a new vehicle and the transmission goes on it, and then suddenly you go, well, I need a new one. And I get the warranty, it's bad analogy, but what I'm saying is, are we, how much weighting are we doing? Does it meet its lifespan? And I know your answer is gonna say it depends. But I think I just don't want a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, we better not be like Calgary, but yet it costs us millions of dollars when we might have left money on the table with that pipe, quite frankly, within the same lifespan and that sort of thing. So maybe your thoughts.
Go ahead, Acting Managing Director Garland.
Thank you. I'll try to answer that the best I can. So the interesting thing with this one, I'll use the Kipling project, for example. We look at the projects in this growth capital. So essentially, this was in the works well before the Calgary. Is just a good example of why it would be important. There's several factors for this particular one. One is the critical area of this infrastructure and the sole source of a large portion of the city. So we're essentially adding a new entity to the network, a new pipe. So that's why it wouldn't belong in our sustaining capital. In their sustaining capital, we replace like for the most part. Whenever we're adding or expanding additional use, then we would utilize it with this manner. As far as the lifespan of the pipe, yes, ours is still is very similar within that 100-year span. We don't know what we don't know if it's going to break. We do have extensive programs where we look at conditions of pipe, not just by age, but we do cammering and inspections. So some of this particular project is to actually do that too, to tie into the pipe and see the condition. But we want that line twin before we start playing with that pipe, because we just to the nature of this type of pipe, the more you mess around with it, the more likely it is going to disturb it and cause a failure. So I can't remember if there was any more parts to your questions, but
no, just wanted to make sure that in the and again, it wasn't really as much Calgary incident, other than it was a bit of an illustration of. I think there's almost this is my humble observation, that they're trying to find someone to take the fall on something like that, when in fact it was a fail of a pipe, that the pipe failed. Not necessarily in year 42 of a 100-year, maybe in the fact that it was such a massive pipe that it affected 60% of the population might be a mitigating factor going forward. But I just wanted to understand that we're not necessarily leaving money on the table by replacing infrastructure prior to its longevity. So I know what I'm hearing from you is a couple mitigating factors that you do. You check the pipe, not necessarily by age. You review in terms of the materiality relative to, does this impact, say, all of south of the city, or is this just a block, is what I'm hearing from you. So anyway, no, I just needed to, I think what we're getting at from all of council is from whence and what thought was, is this a have to have or a nice to have? And I think that's kind of where we're all coming from. And I don't know if it's, the struggle I have is trying to figure out, is this a nice thing to have or do we have to have? And I don't know how we elicit that on the asks that we get. I guess that's my general comment. Thanks.
City Manager Mitchell.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, but I will tell you, if you remember when George Cuff was here and he talked about, you know, through the budget process administratively, there's some blood on the table. There was. And we wanted to make sure, and we were very thoughtful about making sure that what we brought forward to council was a necessity. So the ranking system, when Aaron explained it, you know, there's business and then there's art. But one of the struggles that we had, frankly, administratively is we always need pipes. We always need roads. We can always justify that. But then there's the social piece, facilities for the future, and all of that. So much so that the passionate managing director, Stouth, is coming back 3 days early from his vacation, so he will be here on July 9th to talk about those projects, which fall under his umbrella and are not necessarily infrastructure, but sometimes more social. But I would say, and Aaron can jump in and help me if he doesn't mind, when we looked at that, everything that is above the line that we've presented, the 55 projects, we feel as a collective that they are a necessity.
That's correct, yeah. So there's a couple components to that, just to add to what City Manager and Mitchell said. When we put together the list that we're bringing forward, remember, we're looking at that second tier of our budget structure, which is new growth opportunities. So we're segmenting that from the sustaining capital. And the distinction there is that what we're trying to bring forward to you today is a list of items that in some sense are discretionary. There's a choice here for you to make. There's obviously reasons why we've put these things on the list as we've said. We believe these things are strategically necessary for the city, but what we're trying to do by separating our sustaining from our growth is saying the sustaining is what we need to kind of keep and maintain, and the focus on that discussion is more risk, it's more necessity. What we're looking at is future orientation. We're looking at strategic. We're looking at what are we going to do in the future? How are we going to grow the city? How are we going to protect the city's asset and infrastructure, reduce risk, and help our city to grow in the proper direction? So in some way, all of the items that you're seeing before you have a discretionary component to them.
Thank you very much for the answer. Councillor Sharps is next.
I would just like to make sure Councillor Hirsch is done because he looks like he's still pondering. Okay. Okay, so I have some more, maybe not the smartest comments, but I just want to make sure I understand some of this. So when I look at some of these, so I'm going to use, what am I going to use? The food compost as an example. So when we do this and we prioritize, do we look at like alternate options? Like, as much as I hate to bring this topic up, I'm going to. Do we look at the cost benefit analysis of chickens instead of composting? Like, I hate to say it, but it's, you know, I'm not a chicken person in my yard, but this is about the city and it's about the cost, and it's a question that I have to bring up because there's lots of conversations that allowing chickens would minimize this waste. So did we have those kind of conversations, or do you want us to have those kind of conversations around here? and I'm not really a pro-chicken person, but it doesn't matter. As a counselor, I need to be able to have the conversations whether I'm in agreement or not, right?
So, sorry, to clarify the question, you're asking if when we considered the food waste compost facility,
As an
if we
example.
considered alternatives like chicken
Yeah,
farming? Okay,
I am asking that, absolutely I am.
okay.
Because it is, it's a huge cost when you're looking at chickens. So, but it's just something, you know what, the community was not divided, but there was, you know, as time goes on, more and more people are going that way. It's still probably still not going to be me, but it doesn't matter. It's what's working for our community, what's their questions, and if it saves 2 million, is it worth looking? If we can get it down to 1 million, is it worth looking at, right? So it's just something I would like to know if we did that. And so also my question, I heard a comment about, and I saw it on the list about some cracking pathways and things. So when we're doing that, Aaron, are we looking at paths that have cracks versus places that don't have paths? And what becomes priority?
Madam Chair, I can answer that question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So through the chair, so we actually do have two programs. So we don't have a trail crack sealing program in its own item in our budget at this point in time. We do have a trail infrastructure program. The last 2 years were $917,000 a year that we were putting into overlaying trail. So we have, I want to make sure I have our numbers correct here, but we do 16% of our trails are rated in poor condition, and we resurface 2.5% of our trails annually through our trail infrastructure program. This is specific to cracks that we see, so that would also include new trail development in areas. So if we're expanding a trail, the trail infrastructure program would be the funding source for that. For this would be essentially the repairs of the cracks in existing surface that we would find, and that would basically prolong the life of that path that's existing. So it wouldn't be a new trail development in another
So
area.
new trail development is completely not in this bucket of money.
That's correct, through the chair, not in this trail crack sealing request.
Okay. Thank you, I appreciate that clarity.
There, just to be clear, there is another bucket of money though in our sustaining capital.
Okay.
So the last 2 years was $917,000 a year.
For
So
new
just
trail?
For overlay of existing trail and new trail development.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that is just something, as you know, coming out of DNI last week, that hit a hot topic. So when I go talk to those residents in 2 weeks, I don't want them saying, well, wait a minute, you're gonna go fix a crack in Southridge, but I don't have a trail? So I wanna be able to say, well, actually, you know, Acting Managing Director Will gave me a really good answer, and here it is, right? But I need to be able to know what that is. Make sense? And then my last one was, so my very first point before I even came to this meeting was facilities of the future. So one thing I'm struggling with is, as we're going through this budget, we all know that those numbers aren't even on here. Do we even have an estimate? I guess I am struggling with approving anything here without, and knowing in the back of the mind that you're gonna come with a budget amendment and say, we need $15 million or $20 million or whatever the amount is. So I guess there's two questions. Since this council got in and we started talking about facilities of the future, has there been any accrual towards that facility as far financial accrual? And number two, how are we going to acknowledge? Because to me, this is a budget, and even though you have said it, Aaron, that those things are still pending, when we're doing this on July 9th, like, we're gonna have to have some real numbers to decide what that is, because that would definitely change what I look at here, or maybe it wouldn't, but without knowing those numbers, I feel like I'm making a decision without having that information. And facilities of the future is a big thing, so.
Those are great points, and we definitely have to get to that where we're looking at that in more detail. I just say that regardless of what we do with the facilities for the future, there's still other needs that are going on in the community. There's still need for growth in other areas. Talked about the infrastructure needs within the city as well. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish an appropriate baseline where we can say, look, this is what we think that on a go-forward basis, the city is required to continue to, provide for their status quo services, but also a portfolio of funding that we think is appropriate for growth into the future.
I do understand, and I appreciate that. And I had one last question through the city manager to managing director Will. It kind of something, maybe you can explain it to me better when you made a comment about the, Councillor Hyder asked about the community, what'd you call it? The project plan?
Community well-being plan.
Was that what it was? The kit, no, the kit.
Oh, the kit.
The kit. So my question on the kit is this. I have always been uncomfortable with the city going into business. So if there is like a shop in town that rents stereo equipment, isn't it better to let them make the money off of it other than us make the money off of it? So similar to having an Oilers game, except for what's the difference, right? The difference on the Oilers game is most of the bars are over 18. There was no family event. So it was me that asked for family events, right? So community, I would hate to see us take business away from the two audio places in town if we don't have to. As a small business owner, like I would hate to see the city stand up and start doing immigration and staffing. It would shut my doors. So how are we going to do that? We already are the big player in town. We don't need to be getting into the small, in my opinion. So I guess my question is that really something we need to do is buy stages and speaker systems and things like that?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair. One of the items that was noted in the business case attached, or the shortened version of the business case, was the availability of sound stages, and especially large sound stages. It becomes cost prohibitive for organizations to get them because they're starting to have to go to Calgary to get those. The sound equipment itself might be more readily available, though it, from the information that was prepared through the community development department, appears to be that there is a shortage of that type of equipment when it comes to putting on multiple events. We certainly wouldn't want to be in a position where we're putting private sector out of business by saying we're now in this business in a big way. What we're trying to do is program spaces that are not historically or traditionally been programmed. So they might be areas of park spaces, might be areas where we're trying to, at Echodale, or areas where we don't have infrastructure in there that we might need to have something specialized. But sound stages, I know, have been looking out to other communities to rent those because those aren't readily available in our community, and that can actually prohibit an event from moving forward. So certainly wouldn't be looking to compete with the private sector, but being able to accommodate requests that we get from nonprofit groups and community-based organizations.
Just a quick follow-up. So I'm assuming then we have a rough idea what's available in town.
Through the chair, that's correct. I know our team in community development has identified as a need because they've been running up against that where it hasn't been available. Certainly we would want to support local businesses. That tends to be what we do as far as departments within public services, try to do that first. Where we see an identified need, it might be something that's specialized that the city needs to have that so we could provide it on short notice.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Councillor Dumanowski.
Yeah, through the chair, I'm going to move away from kind of the specific conversation we've been having and move back, if I can, to some of the key assumptions that are identified on page 19 or slide 12, I think it is, or 13. As indicated there, the property tax requirement as of April 23rd, 2024 was 4.9 with 0.5 assessment and now has grown to 5.1. So my first question is, that 4.9, that was an adjustment, an upward adjustment from a previous amount, if my memory serves me well. So can you clarify that? Again, I'm not the judge and jury, just want to understand the facts so that I can recall from my memory where we were and where we are.
Absolutely, I can provide that information. And a more detailed breakdown, I believe, was in a slide in the previous one. So I can try to recall from memory. I believe that that 4.9, what it was made up of was we assumed a 2.3% municipal inflation. We have a 0.5% growth assessment growth. We have a 1.2% related to our budget gap to help alleviate the budget gap and bring us back to to balance by the end of 2026, as well as 1.4% that we had tied to these new growth opportunities that we're bringing forward today. So the amount that we're showing here on the screen would be an increase to that last bucket, that amount that would be related to the new growth opportunities of 0.2.
Okay, just maybe an appropriate segue then to the gap right below there, 6.9 to 10.3. So am I understanding, so when we say budget gap, do we mean the budget gap between what we had projected and what we thought, or are we talking about the actual gap?
This would be the actual gap. So this is, in essence, the amount of cash that we are expending in the year, more than we're bringing in our municipal business units specifically. So what this is showing is that, and the reason why I included it here on the screen, is our target from a property tax perspective is to balance by 2026, and we're doing that by spreading out the burden between 2 years, between 25 and 26. So while we're climbing back up to balance, there's still a portion in 25 that we need to fund to get there. And a lot of this is due to one-time initiatives that we're planning for 2025 that don't necessarily impact that gap in 26.
Okay, well, I admit then I'm having trouble seeing the connections. I'll have to look back to the previous presentation and this and make sense of that for myself, but it feels certainly, at least initially looking at this, counterintuitive to me to think that by increasing our gap, albeit for one-time initiatives, et cetera, that we are essentially getting ourselves closer to our target of no gap, if I heard you correctly. So, but again, to everyone's comments, and certainly I'll just generalize, I mean, we will, and I'll kind of dovetail what I said last time, look to understand the different line items. And what you've done here is great work, and no one's jumping on anyone here for doing the hard work you've done. As the city manager said, there's been blood and sweat put into this, and I need to hear that. I need to feel that. I need to sense that. And not because, again, I need to be persuaded, but because I need to have persuasion. I need to understand what are the keys, because no matter what list you put together, it seems to me, even in life, in your home, there are the needs, the fundamental needs, and then there's the wants, but there's that area in between that isn't quite fitting both. And my observation is there are a number of things on here that are fitting that middle area that I'm struggling with. So I'll look forward to that more detailed conversation. Thank you.
And to that as well, the questions that you ask in the July 9th session, I hope will help to weed some of that out as well. Yeah.
Councillor Hyder.
Thank you, and through the chair. Just, we're having conversations over here, and we're getting to that age of, did we remember that right? Is that what we were told? So in my mind, I'm not speaking for anyone else, the increase in rates to me was always 4.2, 4.6, somewhere in there as far as taxes go. And now that we're looking at this and, oh, okay, it's 4.9, brings us to 5.1. It's just a comment, Erin. This, again, great work. We're in a culture and a community right now that's watching everything we do and are very concerned about everything, utilities, property, food, absolutely. And we did kind of go back and did some Google searching, and it was 4.3 in February of 2024. So maybe if, like Councillor Dumanowski said, help me understand where that came from, because we were told this, just so that when we are talking to members of the community after July 9th, that we have a better understanding. Because this is gonna not go well.
When you indicate the 4.3 in February, are you referring to the property tax increase for 2024? Okay, so this would be for 25, 26 that we're proposing. Does that help, or
It does.
it's a different number?
No, well, you can speak to the presentation, yeah.
Yeah.
I think if I could just jump in here, sorry, your microphone's not on, Councillor Sharps, but I feel like what you're saying is the assumptions in April 2024 for the 2025-26 budget were different than you're assuming now. Is that
I now understand the
capturing it?
confusion. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so April 23rd.
Because trust me, like, I got an old brain here, Aaron. You're young, you got it going on.
Yes.
I was just the numbers to me weren't what even us old people over here were talking about. So
Yes, I just had an aha moment. Okay, so April 23rd was the day that we did the budget deliberation. So that would be different than the 4.3. So that 4.3 represents the increase in property tax for the year of 2024. The April 23rd date that you're seeing on the screen is meant to indicate the previous planning session that we had. So in the previous planning session, we did indicate a 5.4% tax increase, which is made up of a 4.9% and then a 0.5% assessment growth. So that's the estimated tax increase for 2025 and 2026.
okay, thank you. I just so that I'm just saying, we really need to understand, because we are the people that get the calls, the emails, and the Safeway stop and goes. And I want to make sure that I'm understanding it for myself as well. So I appreciate that.
All right, seeing no other speakers, I'll say maybe just something about the business cases themselves. And I won't go through them all in detail, because I think there's you're presenting it, and now we're going to go away and think, and I'm happy to do that. In other sorts of reports we get a recommendation and then other options. Like if we don't do this, then what's the consequence? And so I think what I hear my colleagues may be struggling with is we don't know if this isn't done. Is this something that's going to be on fire in 3 years, or if it's something that needs doing, but we don't have any options. Now, I appreciate that you're making business cases in each department to try to, not sell is not the right word, but promote the idea that this is a good idea for the city. So I'm respectful of the way that they're worded, but there's no opposing viewpoint option. Now, you likely talked about those when you were balancing them out, but we don't know them. So I don't know if there's a feeling from the others that having that other viewpoint, like we would in a normal report to council, might be valuable to us. I think it would be valuable to me, but I can only speak for myself.
We can certainly look at that. I believe some of that detail should be provided in the compendium document that we provided.
It's not quite in the same way that it would be in a report to council, where we've got, this is the recommendation and these are the other options and these are why we don't recommend those options. So you certainly can read through it and see this, like glean from it what not doing something in some of them are, but in a lot of them it's not crystal clear.
And part of our hope too is to get away from always looking at the risk conversation, right? I understand that's an important component, but we're really trying to focus on these items are discretionary. We can do them, or we can choose not to do them. And I know there's the concern of if we don't do these things, what is the outcome? But at the end of the day, these are all items to grow the city, to move forward in a positive direction. So it's more of that strategic alignment that we're looking for with council's strategic priorities. That's what we're trying to get at. There are some items that we're bringing forward now, like the twinning project. That there's a clear risk management component to it. If we don't do this, there's risk that we're taking on as a city, and I can understand the need to understand some of those pieces. We can do our best to try to answer some of those questions, but ultimately, if you have questions about any of the projects, bring them to the July 9th meeting, and that'll be a good opportunity to ask any questions that you have. This is a really new process for us. Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
No, that's fair. City Manager Mitchell.
Thank you through the chair. And I think to your point, I understand where you're coming from, but if we had council going at the table with us, then what's our use? You know what I mean? Like, we are, as administration, trying to take council's vision and bring it forward in this budget process. So in some respects, that's what we've done here. And to have a separate briefing note for everything with pros and cons would, I would think, take away from the work that administration has done already at the table. But that's just my opinion, one woman's opinion. Budgets are challenging. We have to give council enough information to make the decision. But as Aaron has alluded to, this is discretionary. So these are not necessarily, if we don't do it, the city's going to fall apart. These are things that we think strategically are helping you implement your vision. So from a administrative perspective, we did time and effort into thinking how to move forward your strategic vision. So I don't know if that helps or not, but.
I think it does help me, I think, to a certain extent, but I still have to, when making this discretionary decision, know what the alternative is if I don't, or if the alternative is this is going to have to be done in the next 5 years. It doesn't need to be done this budget cycle, but it needs to be done in the next 5 years. I think the notes are clear enough on that kind of information. But if I don't have I feel like I need to know both sides of it. And I think the role of administration is to gather all of that information as subject matter experts, make the recommendations for sure, but to also highlight, I think, where another decision could be made. But if I hear what you're saying, and if I'm getting this correctly, all of these are discretionary. So it's a switch. It's yes or it's no, right? Like the alternative of not doing it at this point in time is just that it doesn't get done at this point in time. And if it was something bad, you would let us know. Is that fair? Okay.
If it was vital to the key infrastructure of the city, if it needed to be implemented in order to maintain what we're doing on a status quo basis, those things are incorporated into Tier 1, base operating, sustaining capital. Those are out of scope of this discussion for today. So we're trying to say with that Tier 1, we've got you covered when it comes to this, you know, the main things that we need to be doing to kind of maintain the city. Now we're looking at the up and beyond.
For sure.
So yeah, I understand, and I think when we did this in as a city, the alternatives were discussed ad nauseum. I know that information is there, and so I do think that has been considered, and our directors and managers and everyone will be here on July 9th, and they can answer any questions that you have about, you know, did you consider this? Did you consider that? And I just mentioned as well, I did say before, but, you know, we're going through a bit of a new process here. And so with that, the feedback you're giving today is really helpful because we may not have hit the mark with these business cases 100% this time around, but this is information. Next budget cycle will come back with a modified approach that meets those needs that you're looking at. So we're hoping to weed that out as we go through where we've missed or maybe where there's information you're looking for that we didn't provide. That's what July 9th is for. That's what the questions are for. We're going to fill the gallery, the virtual gallery, with all of the subject matter experts across the city, and they're at your disposal to ask any questions that you have.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hirsch has another question.
Well, and I was gonna, Councillor Sharps was, I was biting my tongue and I was gonna wait for the next meeting, but it was a good segue. So I appreciate this, this journey that we're on that I think is, you mentioned it and nailed it. It is new. And in some cases, I'm trying to play along. And why I say that is Councillor Robbins' point of saying, you know, we're kind of getting led down a path, almost kind of deciding each project, and I'm actually trying to stay away from that. What I'm trying to do is say, does it make sense? Is it palatable to go to our public and say, oh, by the way, you're going to be looking at a 5.1% increase. So then the question becomes, A, is that palatable in my mind? And if it's not, then I'm going to go back to you and say, I think we need to stay at 4.5 or something. Then it's up to you to decide which project that would be either shelved or deferred or something like that. And I think in governance, that's how it's supposed to be. So I think I'm going to take that path. When I look at these projects, I'll certainly look at the merits of them. But I think at the end of the day, this is a public setting. This is getting circulated. Numbers are being proposed in terms of overall 5.1 plus 0.5% that will certainly be circulated within the community. But I guess it's up to us. And quite frankly, I will be probably doing some due diligence in terms of what some other municipalities are looking at. And I'm sorry that that's going to be half the case. That's my role. Just to understand in my thoughts, does that make sense? So I think it's up to us to establish the goalposts and just leave it at that. And then up to you guys to say, you know, okay, we are in a limited amount in terms of what the discretionary is. So thank you that we looked at some discretionary, but we're backing off because it might be too much for us to chew on, or maybe the taxpayer to chew on. So that's certainly my approach going to be when I look at this and I review everything. I certainly appreciate Councillor Robbins' feedback to feel that way, but I don't know if it's within us to start looking at the yays or nays, and it has to be. But quite frankly, we've been kind of led down that path because we're looking at each one and we're trying to weigh the merits, where I think maybe that's, as feedback, might be not the best approach, because again, a lot of the questions were, even by me, do you have to have it? Is it a nice thing to have? And I think going forward, what I heard was, we're bringing stuff that we think is a necessity, although we're talking discretionary stuff for future growth, like in this component. But anyway, my thoughts. I was going to leave it for the budget, but I think it was just a segue, and it just kind of burned on me to bring it up. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hirsch. I've had a bit of an epiphany while I'm sitting here. So I've reviewed all of these prior to today. I'm going to go back through them, and my focus is going to be the strategic priority piece and how it connects, and less about the dollar figure, although of course that's always but what you're really trying to do in this presentation and giving it to us this way, I think, is to say, is our growth plan meeting the strategic plan that this council wants? So that's where I'm going to focus, less operational and more on that connection, which is, I think, what we're trying to get out of these conversations. So I've had just, as Councillor Hirsch was speaking, I thought, wait, what am I really going to do when I look at these? Really going to look at that connection with our strategic plan. So thank you.
May I respond? I think that's an excellent approach. And as we planned for this year's budget, we did look at what other municipalities are doing. And quite honestly, this decision-making process varies quite wide between different communities. Some communities are more of the governance approach, and other communities that we know, council is approving every single project. And so what we tried to do with this project, with this process, is say, where do we need council's weigh in the most? We think that when it comes to sustaining capital, when it comes to the base operating, we can recommend to you the governance approach, because we think that we know that this is what we need to keep the lights on, to keep everything going the way that it is. But what we're looking for in this process with the growth capital and the operating piece is your buy-in, because each one of these projects is an enactment of your vision. So we're looking for your weigh-in on, does this meet the vision of council? And so that they are discretionary in that nature. And in that way, we're trying to, you won't find a model like what we're doing here today in other municipalities, because we're trying to find the hybrid. Where is the key decision points that we need your weigh in on? And it is about the strategic plan. It's about the community focus. So we're excited to have that conversation with you guys on this particular component of the budget. And then absolutely for the other components, we are looking at it more from a governance approach. And I do think that it is a fair thing to say, look, we'd like to maintain within a 4.5% tax increase. Can you come back with us with some recommendations to remove? We can, if that's the will of council, we can put forward that for the when we come back in November. So those are your decisions to make. We're just trying to provide that playing field for you guys to have that conversation, to get your buy-in and weigh-in so that we can create some alignment. Because again, our goal for you is that we come back with a budget in December that not only gets your approval because it has to, but it inspires your confidence. So that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you very much for that. I will note that Councillor Knodel rejoined us. She had an appointment and she left, and now she's back. So I'll just check in with her to make sure there isn't anything she wanted to ask that hasn't already been covered. She may.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you, Councillor Robbins. I really appreciate the discussion. And thank you for checking in with me. I think at this point it's been valuable to hear I'm going to say not polarizing, but the different perspectives between especially Councillor Robbins and Councillor Hirsch, and I feel that both are valuable. I feel that I have, and I say this often when I'm sitting at the council table, is my mind is I have a split perspective, and I really do hope that there's a way for us as council to preserve the affordability of our community and services in our community, but also meet the goals of our strategic plan. So I'm looking forward to further discussion so that we don't, and I recognize that if we want to do things, that it costs money, and that's just the nature of our work. But I think there's a list of valuable projects and ideas in front of us, and that having the opportunity to sit both as a governing mind, but also have a bit of control over what inevitably happens. We've kind of talked about where we sit in that regard. Anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is I continue to absorb the information and look forward to picking the minds of our organization's leaders and coming to consensus as to what is most important to us while still preserving affordability in the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Knodel, for that great statement. Summing it all up, and I don't see anyone else wanting to speak, which suits me fine. So we can adjourn the meeting unless there's an objection from anyone at 6:51. Thank you all. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you very much.